What do toy crazes, bubbles, manias, and crashes all have in common? Well, it's all a matter of supply and demand. Sometimes people get overly excited about things and there's a huge demand and not that much supply available. When that happens, we typically have prices that go through the roof. And today we're going to be getting into this as it relates to toys and things of that nature, but also as it relates to markets. So before we get into that, my name is Joe Franklin, and here at the Mustard Seed we like to put faith with finance. But today we're going to be talking a lot about the fads of years gone by, and even going back to the 1600s, some of those crazes and manias back then that we can point to today as a learning tool for tomorrow. So let's get right into that. There's four categories of toys we want to talk about. Sometimes we have brands that are established or existing brands that put out new toys that do very well in the marketplace. Sometimes we have old things that have been big in other areas of the world and are made new through great marketing. Sometimes we have new technologies, and sometimes we have flashes in the pan. In the markets, usually the bubbles are not caused by flashes in the pan. They're usually new things, but sometimes it could be a great brand that everybody wants, that people feel are great things to own at any price. Like in the late 1960s with the Nifty 50 going into early 1970s, the Nifty 50 peaked in 1972. They were saying those companies were great at any price, and companies aren't great at any price. Price is what you pay, value is what you get. What price we pay makes a big difference as to whether we exit at a profit or not. When you're buying and everybody says that it's great at any price, it's not. As we think of enduring brands that last, we all know that Barbie has been a staple of girls' toys. They came out with the Barbie movie in 2023, and so Barbie's had a huge resurgence in recent years. But Barbie's changed over the years. It used to be just one type of Barbie. It's a lot like automobiles. Automobiles used to come out just like the Model T. They came in one color. Barbie came with one outfit. Now she has all kinds of outfits and playhouses, and that's what happens in the markets as well. We have some flashes in the pans. We have enduring brands that last. So how are we to know when the demand outstrips the supply? Whenever we have people like your shoe shine person, your Uber driver, or your kids are talking about how big something is, we may be seeing a top in that area. We want to be greedy when others are fearful and fearful when others are greedy. So we see that there's excessive greed out there. That's usually a sign that we want to be getting out. The demand is sometimes exacerbated by a limited supply. People want it all the more because there isn't that much of it. And when we look back to the 1600s, we can see this as it rose throughout the Netherlands. At the time, the Netherlands was the most booming economy in the world. Now, what we notice with bubbles and crazes is they usually start in the most robust economy in the world. And at the time, the Dutch had just invented modern banking, and they invented the stock market. And of course, they invented the futures market not long after that. And everybody wanted tulips because tulips were something new that you could import from East Asia through Turkey, and you can get it into the Netherlands. And everybody wanted tulips that had the variegated petals. And actually these tulips were very, very rare because they could only become variegated petals when they were infected with the virus. And so everybody wanted these special tulips. No tulip was alike. These were non-fungible tulips. And of course, NFTs had become super popular again until recently. But these non-fungible tulips were the wildest craze at the time. And at one point, these tulips were going for over 5,000 florins apiece. 5,000 florins at the time could buy one of the nicest houses on the shoreline of the Netherlands. Since everybody wanted these tulips, the prices kept going up and people wanted to buy the tulips that weren't even out of the ground yet. So they invented the futures market so they could buy tulips that hadn't even sprouted yet, because there weren't enough tulips to go around. When the futures market started trading, they'd trade a piece of paper to somebody else for a higher price through the futures market. There came a bad winter and the demand started to come way down, and the value of the tulips dropped by 90% between the fall and the spring in 1637. The Bubble basically only involved the most highfalutin in society in the Netherlands at the time. Not many people lost a fortune. For a lot of people, it was just a part of their fortune. And we only have one or two instances that we can find where people actually went bankrupt. It didn't ruin the economy by any means, but it was a good story to tell about how people can get carried away with things like tulips and drive the prices way up. These crashes usually only occur in these countries that are the preeminent countries at the time. At the time that the bubble was in the tulip market, the Dutch were the leading country, the most wealthy country in the world. They were taken over by the English when the English learned from the Dutch how to build ships and developed the most massive navy and took over the seas. Then the English became the most wealthy country in the world. In the South Sea, they created a company to trade with the Spanish, where the global trade was something that was pretty new and everybody wanted to get into it. The South Sea Company took on a lot of the debt from the English. Sir Isaac Newton even bought pretty high because he had fear of missing out from his friends. That's when FOMO, I guess, was invented by Sir Isaac Newton. He invented all kinds of different types of math equations and calculus and what have you, but he didn't have a good temperament for investing. As Warren Buffett says, it doesn't matter how high your IQ is. What matters the most is your temperament. If you can buy when everybody else is selling and sell when everybody else is buying, that's a better temperament when you can keep a level head. Everything Star Wars became huge in around 1977. The movie had just come out. We move into the next year and everybody wanted Star Wars action figures and everything Star Wars, all the accessories, and they came out with Lego Star Wars. And as the other movies came out, we had more and more Star Wars. The BB-8 rolling robot was huge in the mid-2010s. And then Grogu, the Baby Yoda, was huge in the early 2020s. And they came out with stuffed Grogus that everybody wanted a stuffed Grogu. The Squishables actually came out with a stuffed Grogu. This is actually a stuffed Warren Buffett right here. The Squishables were really big in around 2020 through 2022, going into 1980. We have rampant inflation caused by going off the gold standard. The dollar's not worth near as much as it used to be, but commodities are doing extremely well. And of course, gold and silver are starting to go through the roof. The Hunt brothers try to corner the market on gold and silver, and they send prices skyrocketing, and they peaked in 1980. And of course, when things go skyrocketing, sometimes they have to come back down to earth, and gold came down a lot throughout the 1980s. And finally bottomed out in the late 90s, early 2000s before it started to move up again. Again, it's a situation where the demand outstrips the supply. When we see a situation where people have shorted a company and the shorts get squeezed and the price goes way, way up, and we have people that are forced to sell at just about any price, that's usually a sign that it's time to get out. 1980s going into 1990 in Japan is looking like it's going to pass up the U.S. as the preeminent economy. About 30 of the top 50 biggest companies in the world are now Japanese companies, but Japan was living off a lot of speculation and a lot of borrowing that propped up their economy. And so it caused the stock market and the real estate market to go crazy. The gardens around the Emperor's Palace were said to be worth more than the entire state of California in 1990. One parking space in Tokyo was worth more than a house in California. The bubble eventually popped, and the Japanese stock market eventually dropped by 80%. They didn't recover for about 30 years since the bubble popped in 1990. When we talk about toys, we have the bear toys or the cuddly toys. We have the doll toys that the girls like to play with, whether they're baby toys or grown-up doll toys. We have action figures that are also kind of like dolls for the boys. We have the toys with wheels, whether they be bikes or cars or what have you. And we have the electronics. In the 1920s, we had the electric train. Winnie the Pooh came about, and we had the yo-yo. The yo-yo was an old thing made new through great marketing. And of course, electric trains are still big even today. People have enjoyed playing with electric trains ever since. Charles Mackay wrote about both the South Sea Company and the Tulip Mania in the mid-1800s, and he was living through the railroad bubble, and he didn't see it as a bubble at the time. He thought the railroads were going to take over the world. And the first railroads are extremely profitable in Britain. It was the new thing at the time that everybody wanted to get involved in railroads. But the British Parliament issued business licenses for railroads all over the place. They even had a railroad that was to be going through Buckingham Palace at the time. Of course, they didn't build that railroad. Only about 50% of the railroads that they had planned in the 1840s actually got built. But there was a lot of money chasing railroads. It's kind of like solar power or wind power or a lot of these new technologies that everybody wants to get involved in and the government supports. So there's a lot of money coming after that. But it attracts people that actually don't do anything with the money. They just take the money and run sometimes. And that's what happened with the railroads in many instances. A lot of these railroads never got built. But the railroad boom left a great industry behind that served Britain very, very well in the future. It was just something that didn't get built out to the extent, and it wasn't as big as they thought it would be at the time. The Disney brand is an enduring brand that has lasted throughout the years. Of course, the most recent that have been super popular have been the Frozen toys in around 2014. We all still enjoy playing with Mr. Potato Head. That's been an enduring toy. Frisbee was something that was kind of commonplace, and so they turned out those plastic Frisbees in the 1950s. Cabbage Patch dolls were huge. I know my wife loved her Cabbage Patch doll. They had to go and adopt one, and they haven't been that huge ever since. So the Slinky, it's a wonderful toy. It's fun for a girl and a boy. And they made all these different variations of Slinkies that have been really popular over time. Everybody wanted Atari at the end of the 70s, but Atari stopped coming out with games and it kind of went away. They came out with other new, better game consoles as time went on. Nintendo basically replaced Atari as the key game console that everybody wanted. And then they came out with Super Nintendo a little bit later in the decade. And so Nintendo ever since then has been one of the biggest game consoles that has continued to sell all throughout the years. So Nintendo's been a brand that's lasted. Star Wars has been a brand that's lasted. Barbie's been a brand that's lasted. Hot Wheels has been a brand that's lasted. But things like Cabbage Patch and Atari and Big Wheel, they've come out with things that are a little bit better over time, and these haven't lasted, unfortunately. Beanie Babies were huge. That was one of the biggest fads that we had. And of course, we had the advent of Tickle Me Elmo. Tickle Me Elmo has been one that has had a resurgence in years after. So Tickle Me Elmo is part of a brand, part of the Sesame Street brand. And they later came out with a Hokey Pokey Elmo. They came out with Let's Rock Elmo. And then in 2013, they came out with a Big Hugs Elmo. So all these Elmo toys have come about over time. Elmo is something that has stood the test of time, but not all of these things stand the test of time. Xbox was huge in the mid-2000s, then PlayStation 3 was huge the year after. Apple invented the iPod, and so that was the highest selling item in 2007. The iPhone was the highest selling item in 2009. And the iPad was the highest selling item in 2010. And ever since then, Apple has dominated the world as far as products being sold around the world. Of course, they sold more products than just about anybody else up until recent years, and they were the most valuable company up until recent years when NVIDIA kind of passed them up here recently. But Apple is an enduring brand that got its start in the 1980s. It went through a period where it wasn't coming out with quite as many innovative types of things. Nintendo has continued to come out with things that are better. In 2008, they came out with the Nintendo Wii. In 2012, they came out with the Wii U. Over time, they've come out with different versions of Game Boys and things of that nature. And so Nintendo continues to innovate and come out with new things as the technology improves. When we look at other things that have come about that have kind of been flashes in the pans, we have things like Hatchables. We've had things like Fingerlings. We've had things like the Baby Shark song puppet. We've had things like this year, the biggest thing is Labubu. So Labubu I don't see as being something that's going to be super long lasting. But we've also had things like Pokemon, which I didn't think would be super long lasting, but has had a resurgence over the years, especially when you have Pokemon apps on your phone and you're going around trying to find all these Pokemon all over the world for your kids. That has been something that has actually been more long lasting that you wouldn't have thought. Fast forward to the dot-com boom. We have a lot of borrowing, we have new technology. Everybody wants something with .com after the name, and a lot of people were buying things that didn't even have profits. The internet has been something that's made a big difference in everybody's life ever since then, but the prices got out of hand. Unfortunately, we may be seeing the same thing in two different technologies today. We've got the blockchain technology, which has seen a lot of bubbles and busts over the last few years. It tends to go through a 4-year cycle of bubbles and busts. And then we've got the AI technology. And a lot of people are saying that these AI companies are just investing in each other, and it's a big circle of companies investing in each other, driving up the price of the shares. It may be that we're building up the market capitalization of these companies and assuming that these companies are going to be a lot bigger than they're ever going to be. Now, there's a lot of growth in this area right now, but people are assuming that this growth is going to last forever, and the growth never ever lasts forever. Since you love this video, please feel free to click on this video here. The algorithm thinks you'll like this video, and put those thumbs up. Hype the video if you can. Subscribe to the channel. We'll catch up with you next time.